Wyoming Territory, June 1876. The kind of morning when the sky was too blue, too still, like the whole land was holding its breath. Eliah Callahan rode along the edge of his north pasture, reins loose in one hand, rifle secured to his saddle. He had not planned to do anything but check on a busted fence line and maybe catch sight of the wild mustangs that sometimes grazed near the riverbend. Life had gone quiet since his father died 3 winters back and left him the ranch. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that set in a man's bones and made him forget how to speak anything but orders to cattle and horses. But that morning something in the air felt off. The birds were gone. The wind was still. His mare's ears twitched as she caught a sound he had not yet heard. Then it came a scream. Raw. Sharp. A woman's scream. Eliah kicked his horse into a gallop without hesitation. The scream had come from the gulch near the old cottonwoods. As he crested the ridge, he saw them 3 men on horseback, one already dismounting, the other 2 circling like vultures. In the middle of it, a woman. Her dress was torn, her ankle bloodied, and she had backed herself against a tree, gripping a rock in both hands like she meant to go down swinging. He did not stop to think. The first shot dropped the man closest to her. The second sent the others scrambling. One turned and fired, the bullet grazing Eliah's arm, but he barely blinked. He fired again, and the second rider went down. The last man fled, disappearing into the trees. The woman stared at him like she had not decided whether he was her rescuer or the next threat. "You hurt bad?" Eliah asked, lowering his rifle but keeping his eyes on her. She blinked at him, then looked down at her ankle. "Sprained, maybe? I cannot walk." He dismounted and closed the space between them slowly. "I am not here to hurt you. My name is Eliah Callahan. I have a ranch about 5 miles from here." She looked down at the bodies, then back at him. "They were going to kill me. I figured," he said quietly. "Can you tell me your name?" She hesitated. "Marabeth Zeller." He nodded once. "All right, Marabeth. You are safe now. Let us get you out of here." He wrapped her ankle with a strip torn from his shirt, then lifted her gently into the saddle. She flinched at the touch, but did not push him away. He rode with her in front of him, her hands clutching the horn, her breath sharp and fast. They said little on the ride back. She kept her face turned away, and he did not press her with questions. But he noticed things: the way her shoulders stiffened at every sound, the way she flinched when a hawk cried overhead. Whatever had happened to her before those men found her, it had been going on a long time. When they reached the ranch, Eliah helped her inside the small cabin he called home. "It is not much," he said, setting her down gently on the bed, "but it is safe." She looked around slowly. The place was clean, plain. A rifle above the hearth. A Bible on the shelf. A hand-sewn quilt folded at the foot of the bed. He handed her a clean cloth and a tin cup of water. "Thank you," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "You can stay as long as you need," he said. "No one will find you here." Marabeth nodded, her eyes filling. She pressed the cloth to her ankle, not letting him see the tears fall. Eliah moved to the stove and started a fire. He did not ask what had happened. Not yet. She would tell him when she was ready. It was hours later that she finally spoke again. He had made stew, and they were eating in silence when she said, "They have been following me for a day. I was trying to get to Cheyenne. I thought I could find work there. I ran away from a man in Kansas who called himself my husband." Eliah looked up, eyes steady. "Was he?" "No," she said quickly. "He bought me. I was 16. He wanted someone to cook, clean, and bear children. I did all of it until I could not anymore. He broke bones when I said no." Eliah's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "I had to leave. I waited until he was gone for supplies. Took what I could carry and ran. I never thought I would make it this far." "You did," Eliah said. "You made it." The next morning, she woke to find a pair of his late mother's boots by the bed and a folded dress beside them. He had left a note in rough handwriting: "Might fit. Coffee is on the stove." Marabeth limped into the kitchen, boots too big but welcome. Eliah was outside splitting wood. He nodded at her without speaking, sweat on his brow, his shirt tucked into worn suspenders. She watched him from the porch for a while before returning inside. By the 3rd day, she could walk with a cane he had carved from a branch. She followed him out to the barn and leaned on the stall, watching him brush down one of the horses. "You live out here alone?" she asked. "Since my father died," he said. "Had a brother once, but he died in the war. Mother passed before that." "No wife?" He paused, then shook his head. "No, never had the time." "Or the want?" Marabeth tilted her head. "Seems to me you are the kind who wants, just forgot how to show it." He looked at her then, really looked. "And you? You plan to keep running?" "I do not know," she said. "I have never had somewhere to stay that did not come with a cage." Eliah set the brush down. "There are no cages here." That night, as the sun dropped behind the hills, they sat on the porch in silence. Marabeth wrapped herself in one of his mother's shawls, and Eliah handed her a tin cup filled with tea. "Do you ever get lonely?" she asked. Eliah stared out over the pasture, the sky streaked in orange and blue. "Every day." She looked at him, her voice soft. "Me too." He turned to her, eyes searching hers. "I did not mean to find you, Marabeth. But I am glad I did." Her breath caught. "Why?" "Because you are the first person in a long time who makes this place feel full." She reached for his hand without thinking, her fingers brushing his. "I do not want to be afraid anymore." "You will not be," he said. "Not while you are here?" He did not kiss her that night. But he held her hand until the stars came out and neither of them let go. By the end of the week, the rhythm between them had begun to settle into something unspoken but certain. Marabeth spent mornings gathering eggs from the hens and rinsing them in the spring bucket near the door. Eliah worked the cattle, mending fence posts along the western ridge and checking the salt blocks. They rarely spoke before noon, but it wasn't silence that kept them apart. It was the weight of learning how to be near each other without fear. One morning, as she stirred cornmeal into a pot over the hearth, she said, "I can sew. If you've shirts needing mending, I could take a look." Eliah looked up from the ledger at the table. "There's a pile in the chest by the bed. I haven't touched it since my mother passed. I'll make a start after supper then." He nodded and returned to his figures, but her offer stayed with him longer than the numbers did. Later that afternoon, she walked the pasture line with a basket tucked over one arm, picking wild onions and sweet clover. Her ankle still bore the ache of healing, but she moved slow and sure. When Eliah spotted her from the hilltop, he didn't call out, just watched her for a moment, the way her skirt brushed the tall grass, how the wind lifted the curls at her nape. She stopped at the fence and rested her hand on the rail. "Eliah," she called when she spotted him. He rode down toward her, the horse's hooves soft in the field. "Something wrong?" "No," she said. "Just wanted to ask what you feed the calf in the pen behind the barn. He's favoring one side, and I wondered if it might be how he's eating." He dismounted, tying the reins loosely around a post. "You've an eye for animals?" "My father kept mules. We had a small place near the tallgrass prairie. I learned enough to know when a creature's not right. I'll take a look with you." They walked the rest of the way side by side, the silence not uncomfortable now, but companionable. In the pen, she knelt beside the calf and pressed her hand gently along the creature's flank. "His right side's tight," she said. "Could be colic, or maybe he ate something he shouldn't have." "I'll check the pasture for you, or chokecherry," Eliah said. "I've seen 'em crop near the creek bed." Marabeth looked up at him. "You always work this land alone?" "I hire help during branding, or if something floods," he said. "Otherwise, I manage." She wiped her hands on her apron. "It's too much for one man." "I manage," he repeated. "But I never said it wasn't too much." That night, she sat by the fire sewing the shoulder seam of one of his shirts. Eliah read from a worn newspaper, eyes moving slow across the page. When she set the finished shirt down, she glanced toward him. "You ever think about leaving this place? Trying something new?" He looked up. "Not in a long while." "Why?" She hesitated, then spoke slowly. "I've never stayed anywhere longer than need required. But I wonder what it might feel like to belong somewhere. To someone." His expression didn't shift, but he placed the paper down and met her eyes. "You don't have to keep running, Marabeth. I don't know how to stop." "Then let me help you learn." She looked away, blinking fast. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing against the windows like it meant to remind them the world still turned beyond these walls. On the 6th morning, Eliah saddled a second horse. When she stepped out onto the porch, he handed her a pair of gloves. She's steady, he said, nodding toward the mare. You'll ride with me today. Marabeth's brow lifted. Where? To see the land. If you're to stay, might as well know what surrounds you. They rode in silence at first, the horses moving slow through the lower fields. When they reached the bluff above the river, Eliah dismounted and helped her down. She stood at the edge, eyes sweeping across the valley spread below. It's more than I imagined, she said. He didn't answer, just watched her face as she took in the sweep of green and the way the cottonwoods lined the bank like old sentries. Marabeth turned toward him. You ever thought about building more here? A bigger house, maybe. A place for, she stopped herself, but Eliah heard it. I did once, he said. Thought I might marry. She was the daughter of a cattle broker from Fort Laramie. Didn't want land, though? Wanted a man who'd follow her east. Marabeth nodded. And you wouldn't go? I couldn't. This place is in my blood. She looked back at the land, her voice quiet. I've never had anything in my blood but fear. Eliah stepped closer, not touching, just close enough that she could feel his nearness. You've got grit in you, he said. More than most I've known. She looked up at him, and her voice was steadier than it had been all week. Would you want me to stay? I wouldn't have asked you to ride with me if I didn't. She nodded once. Then I think I might try. They rode back as the sun started to dip, the light turning honey gold across the fields. At the gate, he reached for her hand as she dismounted. She didn't pull away. Inside, she hung the gloves beside his on the hook near the door. They touched, worn leather against worn leather, side by side. The rain came 3 days later, steady and cold, soaking through the cotton fields and drumming low against the tin roof of the barn. Eliah stood with his back to the stall door, arms crossed as he watched Marabeth kneel beside the calf. She had a thick band of burlap tied around her waist and her sleeves were rolled to the elbows. The calf's breathing had eased since she'd begun feeding it warm mash with a spoon carved from bone. You've got a steady way with him, Eliah said, voice quiet over the rain. Marabeth didn't look up. He only needed someone to wait long enough for him to trust the food. Eliah shifted his weight, boots sinking slightly into the straw. That's not always easy. She set down the spoon and wiped her hands on a square of cloth. It's not supposed to be. When she rose, he offered her his coat, and she took it without hesitation, draping it over her shoulders as they stepped out beneath the overhang. The light was soft, the sky low. The fields stretched out in muted green, the air thick with the scent of wet sage and turned earth. I've been thinking, Eliah said, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Come autumn, I'll need someone to help sort the cattle for winter. If you're here, come then. I want it to be more than shelter you have. Marabeth turned toward him, rain clinging to the edge of her lashes. You mean work? I mean place, he said. A name on the ledger, a say in the land. If you want it. Her brow furrowed. You don't even know what I'm good at. I know enough to see how the barn runs smoother since you stepped into it. She studied his face, searching for some catch in the offer, but found none. I never had my name anywhere that wasn't someone else's, she said. This land needs 2 hands, he said. And I'm tired of eating stew alone. Her mouth lifted into something small and unsure. I can make biscuits. Not great, but better than stew. I'd take that trade. They walked back to the cabin beneath the eaves of the pines, the rain softening as they moved. Inside, she lit the lamp while he pulled off his boots by the door. She caught him watching her as she moved about the kitchen, her shoulders a little squarer now, her steps more certain. There's a letter in my trunk, she said. From my sister in Emporia. She don't know where I've gone. I'd like to write her. There's paper in the desk drawer. Ink too. I'll ride to the post next time I go for grain. She nodded once, then hesitated. She'll ask what I'm doing, where I've gone. So tell her, he said. Say you found a place where the roof don't leak and the man don't shout. Marabeth turned slowly and met his gaze. Is that what this is, Eliah? A place? He took a step forward, careful and deliberate. It can be. If you want it. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for the tin of flour and set it beside the mixing bowl. I'll make those biscuits now. He didn't press her. Just stoked the fire, then sat at the table and watched her work, the sound of whisking and the quiet thud of dough against wood filling the room. By the time supper was ready, the rain had stopped. They ate without hurry, the biscuits warm and rough-edged, butter melting through the middle. Not bad, Eliah said, finishing his second. Marabeth leaned back in her chair. They'll be better next time. After the dishes were washed and the fire banked for the night, she stood near the window looking out into the dark. You keep a lantern out in the barn, she said. For the foaling mare. She's due before month's end. You'll want help when the time comes. I will, he said. She turned from the window, her voice steady. Then let me be here when she does. Let me be part of this place. Not just passing through. Eliah crossed the room, stopping just short of her. You're not passing through, Marabeth. Not unless you choose to. She reached up then, fingers grazing the edge of his collar. I'm tired of choosing fear. He laid a hand over hers. Then choose this instead. She nodded once, barely, and he leaned in slow and certain and kissed her like something promised at the end of a long road. When they pulled apart, neither of them spoke. Outside, the wind moved through the pine boughs like a hush, and inside, the warmth between them held. The foaling came before dawn, with a sharp wind threading through the slats of the barn and the lantern casting long shadows against the stall walls. Marabeth knelt beside the mare, her skirt soaked through at the hem, her palm pressed steady against the animal's flank. Eliah crouched on the other side, quiet but sure, jaw set as he worked to guide the colt into the world. When it was done, the colt lay breathing slow against the straw, slick and trembling but alive. The mare, exhausted but calm, nudged the foal with her nose. Marabeth leaned back on her heels and exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. You've done this before, Eliah said, his voice low and rough from hours of holding still. With mules, she said. Never with something so fine. He stood and offered her a hand. You've got the makings of a rancher. She took it, rising with a wince. I'll settle for dry clothes and a warm fire. They walked back to the cabin in silence, shoes caked with mud. Inside, she peeled off her damp shawl and hung it by the stove. Eliah poured coffee, his hands stained with straw and burth, and handed her a tin cup. She took it, fingers slow around the warmth. There's a quiet in you, she said after a while. Not the kind that keeps to itself. The kind that makes room for other people to breathe. I wasn't always like that, he said. But grief hollows a man in ways nothing else can. She didn't press, only watched the fire flare against the blackened stove walls. My brother, he continued. He was younger. Died in Virginia. Took most of my father's spirit with him. After that, we didn't talk much. We just worked. And your mother? She held it together until her lungs gave out one winter. She kept her sorrow clean, never let it sour. She folded her arms and leaned back against the wall. I used to wonder what it'd be like to carry someone's grief with them, not just your own. Eliah looked at her then, quiet and full of something he hadn't named yet. It'd be easier if more folks knew how. Later that morning, after the sun pulled up over the hill, Marabeth brought out a stack of linens she'd found in one of the trunks. She laid them out on the table, sorting through what could be salvaged. These are hand-stitched, she said, tracing the edge of a faded pillowcase. Who made them? My mother's hands. She'd mend after supper, sitting where you are now. She folded the cloth gently. Then I'll finish what she started. Eliah leaned against the doorway, watching her without speaking. The cabin felt different now, less like a place he returned to and more like something he was part of. That afternoon, they worked the east fence together. She carried a coil of wire over her shoulder, and he drove the stakes. When she tightened the line, she glanced toward the ridge. There's smoke, she said. He followed her gaze. That'd be the Thompsons. Their chimney's low. They burn pine in the spring. You know every inch of this valley, don't you? I ride it often enough. A man learns by repetition. You ever think of expanding? Hiring more hands, building out? I've thought of it. He paused, but only recently started thinking of why. She didn't ask what he meant. He didn't need to explain. The next day, she rode into town with him for supplies. He hadn't brought her before, not out of reluctance, but because it hadn't felt right until now. She wore a clean dress and pinned her hair back, and when they passed the saloon, a few heads turned but none dared speak. Eliah's presence at her side was steady and unmistakable. At the mercantile, she stood beside him as he ordered flour, nails, and horse liniment. When the shopkeeper asked if she'd like anything herself, she hesitated. You got ink that don't smear? She asked. We do, the man said. I'll take a bottle. Eliah met her eyes as they stepped outside. You writing again? letters, and something else. Maybe a record of things. I don't want to forget the way this place feels. He helped her into the wagon seat. Then I'll make sure it keeps feeling worth remembering. That night, after the horses were fed and the tools put away, Marabeth sat at the writing desk, the lamp casting a golden arc over the page. Eliah carved a wedge of cheese with his pocket knife and watched her from the hearth. "What do you write about?" he asked. "Start with the mare," she said. "Then the valley. Then maybe the first time I chose to stay somewhere without being asked to." He ate slowly, letting her words settle in the space between them. "I've got a spare room," he said after a pause. "It's not much, but it's yours if you want it." She lifted her head. "I want more than a room." He stood then, walked to her side, and laid a hand on her shoulder. "Then take all of it." She turned, looked up at him, and didn't look away. "I think I already have." He bent slightly, and this time, when he kissed her, it wasn't cautious or careful. It was rooted like the land beneath them, like the lives they had begun to build from the quiet up. Outside, the wind shifted westward, warm and full of dust and promise. Inside, the lamplight burned steady, and neither of them moved from that moment for a long, long while. By early September, the last of the tall grass had dried to gold, and the hills wore the hush of nearing frost. Eliah and Marabeth stood side by side near the edge of the west pasture, a string of cedar posts behind them and the last of the wire drawn taut. The work had taken days, but the fence was sound and they had finished it together. She brushed the dirt from her palms and glanced toward the distant rise. "There's a stand of blackberry bramble near the edge of that ridge," she said. "I saw it yesterday while checking the herd. Thought it might be worth gathering." Eliah adjusted his gloves. "You thinking pies or preserves?" She smiled, the corners of her eyes warmed by sun and wind. "Both, if you're willing to build a shelf for storing jars. There's no space left in that cupboard between the flour tin and your father's old whiskey jug." "I'll make room," he said. "We've got time before snow." They rode out the following morning, her saddle eased with a cushion she'd stitched from leftover ticking. The brambles grew dense against the slope, tangled with late summer weeds. Marabeth worked with calm focus, her basket filling with fat, dark berries while Eliah cleared the tougher branches with his belt knife. The sun was mild, the light filtered through thin cloud cover, and they moved with the kind of quiet that didn't need filling. When they broke for water, she leaned against a smooth rock and wiped her brow. "You ever think about planting here? Not just grazing. Something that roots deeper." "I've wondered," he said. "Soil's good in the flats near the creek. Could plant winter wheat or maybe build a kitchen garden come spring." She looked at him over the rim of her canteen. "Would you want help with that?" "I'd want it to be ours," he said. "Not just mine." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked back down the trail they'd ridden where the land stretched wide and open. "I'm not used to being asked what I want," she said. "Most of my life, I was told." "Well," he said, "I'm asking now." She set the canteen down and walked over to stand beside him. "Then I want this. The work, the soil, the long days. I want what we're building." They married beneath the cottonwood by the creek where the roots twisted into the water and the wind carried the scent of laid hay. It was a quiet joining, just the two of them and an older neighbor, Mrs. Harland, who had once delivered Eliah's mother's last winter quilts. She brought a ribbon of blue silk and tied their hands with it before pronouncing the vows. Afterward, they shared bread and honey at the cabin table, the fire lit low though the day was warm. He placed a small carved box in front of her, the lid worn smooth. "My mother's," he said. "For keepsakes. I thought you might want it." Marabeth opened it slowly. Inside lay a folded square of linen, a thimble, and a single dried sprig of prairie clover. She ran her fingertips along the inside of the lid. "I'll keep the first page I wrote here," she said. "And every letter you send back from town." They spent the next weeks layering the root cellar, drying meat, and banking soil around the base of the outer walls. The air grew sharper each morning, and the horses' coats thickened. Marabeth planted garlic near the back stoop, and Eliah built a frame for cold storage beside the barn. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the last of the geese fly west, she leaned her head on his shoulder. "I used to believe peace was something other people earned," she said. "People born with softer hands or kinder luck." He rested his cheek against her hair. "You earned it. Every step that brought you here." She wrapped her hand around his. "Promise me something." "What is it?" "If fear ever finds me again, remind me of this." Of the wind on the porch and the smell of cedar and the way you never once asked me to be less than I am. I won't need to remind you, he said, because I'll be here, always. And fear won't know its way past the gate. Their first winter came early. Snow blanketed the valley before the last of the pears had fallen. But inside the cabin, the fire never went out. Marabeth read aloud from the books left by Eliah's mother, and he taught her how to shape horseshoes in the small forge behind the barn. They learned each other's rhythms, when to speak, when to be silent, and when to simply hold close and let the long night pass. Come spring, the mare foaled again, this time without trouble. Marabeth named the colt Flint, for the spark in his stride. The blackberry bramble bloomed heavy, and the shelves in the pantry filled with jars sealed tight with wax and cloth. One morning, just after sunrise, Eliah stepped onto the porch and found Marabeth sitting with a letter in her lap. She looked up, eyes bright. My sister's coming to visit. Says she wants to see if I truly found the end of the world or just a better beginning. He sat beside her. She's welcome here. She'll see it, you know. That this is a life worth staying for. He rested a hand on her knee. She'll see that you made it. Marabeth turned to him, her smile quiet and deep. We made it. Eliah kissed her then, slow and sure, with the wind rising behind them and the sun lifting gold across the pasture. And in that kiss, there was no fear, no silence, no weight left to carry, only the promise of all the days ahead, written in the rhythm of the land and the strength of love that had asked for nothing but truth. Years passed. The fields held wheat and the orchard bore fruit. The cabin grew by 2 rooms, one with a view of the ridge and another with a cradle carved by Eliah's hands. They raised children with dirt under their nails and stories in their bones. And every evening, when the light stretched long across the valley, Eliah and Marabeth sat on that same porch, hands clasped, hearts steady, knowing they had built something whole. Together.